Council, are we ready to resume our proceedings? If we are, please get the witness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The witness is being brought into the room as we speak. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mrs. Sosseh. Welcome back to the session. Did you have a good break?
Yes, I did.
I'd like to remind you that you're still under oath, and we will continue with where we left off before the break. You had just testified about a statement that the GPU issued in response to the President's remarks regarding the late Data Haidara. Mm-hmm. Following that, members of the GPU were arrested. 7 people were arrested. 1 individual was later discharged. That's Mr. Saidi Khan. The 6 were then convicted. But following international pressure, you're one of the people who really went around trying to shed light on that, trying to get the international community to put pressure on the then president to release them. They were actually released without having served much of their sentence. After that, did you remain outside of the Gambia?
Yes, yes, I did.
For how long did you remain outside the Gambia?
9 years.
So this is from mid-2009, let's say June 2009, which is when the arrest occurred, until more recently.
Yeah, until 2017.
Before we talk about the events and the incidents that happened to you during your time away, perhaps we can just talk a bit about what kind of work you engaged in while you were away. Because my understanding is you continued working on issues related to the media as well as the Gambia. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, as I said, as GPU president, I was also coordinator of a regional training capacity building initiative for journalists in West Africa. The head office was in Dakar, but the project itself was based in Bamako. So we worked in the ECOWAS member states and Mauritania. This also gave me the opportunity to travel a lot within the sub-region. And because it was journalism and media related, and I had a very understanding board, we would take the opportunity to meet up with leaders in various countries that we went to, or organize press conferences if there was a need to on something that was happening in the Gambia and related to journalism or the media. But basically, the capacity building project was targeted at journalist unions across West Africa to enhance their capacity. At that point in time, I believe that beyond the Ghana Journalist Association and the Nigeria Union of Journalists, the GPU, despite our small size and lack of resources, the capacity that we had and the resilience that we showed was basically why they wanted us to lead this initiative. So there was, yes, the training of journalists, but it was more about union building. So we had to draft like a collective bargaining agreement for a sub-regional one at that. We had proposed draft text to the ECOWAS on freedom of expression. And so generally it was to strengthen media in the sub-region.
Did you join or create any organizations related to the Gambian human rights violations?
Oh, yeah. I was Secretary General of the Coalition for Change. I was approached by Dr. Jana and others that they were forming this coalition, and they wanted me to be the face of the coalition after consultations with different members. So he would be the coordinator on the ground, but that they had proposed, I guess, a different team, but then we finally agreed on, or a different title, but we finally agreed on Secretary General. So I was, based on where I was, it was easier for me to speak out on issues and travel out if need be. So we had agreed that I would be the Secretary General of the Coalition for Change. But later as well, we set up the Civil Society Associations Gambia, but I guess we can talk about that.
So is it the Coalition for Change Gambia?
Yeah.
What was the mandate or objective of that coalition? Like, what was the way, how did it work, essentially?
Well, we were conscious of the fact that there was little room for divergent view and dissent, and so we thought that we could actually form something on the ground which would target university students, other groups, to raise sensitization with the final objective being obviously to bring about a peaceful change, which was why the awareness raising and sensitization part were the core mandates of the coordinator who was on the ground.
And were the members of this organization mainly journalists, or did it cut across the spectrum of Gambian society?
No, very few journalists. We had people from all walks of life. As I said earlier, Dr. Jana I met whilst he was Minister of Information when Ndey had just died. And I remember after that meeting, he came to my office, or he called me first. Another security chief who was at that meeting, who I wouldn't want to name, also called, and they were quite happy that the GPU, they could not say this at the meeting, but they were quite pleasantly surprised and happy that the GPU had decided to meet with the National Security Council and raise issues that were of concern to us. So we had cemented our relationship as friends based on this, and sometimes he would give me advice that I was maybe too harsh and I should tone it down a bit, but because of this position that he took about the GPU and that he would welcome us openly in his office, which was rare at this time, especially after Ndey died, I developed a lot of respect for him. And when he was initially sacked as minister and questioned, I believe, I was the first person that he called and came to my house to tell me that he was sacked. And this is what he was told. And so from then on, we had become friends and we would exchange ideas on what was happening. He was obviously a political activist, and he thought we should do more, meaning that we should take more concrete steps to bringing about change. But I was never interested in doing things from a political perspective, and convinced them that we should really take the civil society route.
Did you engage in any other civil society organization? You started to mention another one.
Yes, CSAG, Civil Society Associations Gambia. But this came about after Dr. Jana was arrested, and I tried to reach out to several Gambian groups that were in the US, in the UK, and proposed that maybe, despite having our independent groups and various identities, we should actually have an umbrella organization within which we could take concrete actions as a group, and then when it came to the thematic areas that we were interested in, we could work in our various individual groups. So there was some reception, but eventually it worked. Banka Mane was, I guess, the president. I was the Secretary General again, but there was still CCG and CSAG. So actions that I could not take in the name of CCG because of security concerns about Dr. Jana, I would take in the name of CSAG, obviously in consultation with the group.
So throughout that time that you remained outside of Gambia, you were still very much engaged in speaking out, engaging people who were still in the Gambia on the human rights violations that were going on.
Oh, certainly. I at some point when I was no longer GPU president, and given what happened at the GPU Congress, there was NIA presence. Journalists were harassed because they spoke to me on Skype or spoke to me on the phone. For their own safety, I had cut off contact with most of my colleagues in the media, even though, like Waja, the project that I was running, would have activities in the Gambia. We would still fund meetings in the Gambia. I could not come, other staff would come. The GPU was a beneficiary and a member of Waja. But on a personal level, I had decided that I would cut off communications with most of my colleagues in the media because of other actions that I took and for which I did not want them to be persecuted because they were not a part of that.
So can you tell us how the Gambian government reacted to you being outside the country and yet actively engaging in matters concerning human rights violations within the country? What was their reaction?
Well, it was several-fold, possibly not two-fold. First, because I was traveling so much, my passport was full. It didn't expire, it was full after 2 years. So I had to renew my passport, and I applied for a new passport, being away, which most Gambians do. And unbeknown to the person who had deposited the request for a new passport, I was apparently on a blacklist. So he was called to say that the passport was ready and should be picked up. And when he turned up, he's a former teacher, luckily. The person who was supposed to arrest him was supposedly his former student, and told him, "Do you know this woman?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "You should leave," because we were instructed to arrest the person who came to pick up the passport. She's on a blacklist.
So there was a blacklist of Gambians who were supposedly denied passports because of their activities.
Yeah.
And you were one of them.
Apparently, yeah.
So what happened after that?
So I contacted a lawyer friend and asked him to follow up with the Director of Immigration, which he did, and he was told that they don't have a problem issuing me with a passport, but that I should come in person to collect my passport. And he told me, don't, I know you're very stubborn, but please don't, because they're still looking for ways to get you. So I didn't, and I discussed it with the Malian Foreign Ministry, because we had a very good working relationship. As I said, the project was a sub-regional project, and we had to work with the ministry to get tax exemptions, and for our status to be recognized as a regional organization, we needed to work closely with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I spoke to the minister about it, and he told me that they did not have a problem issuing me with a travel document, but that the government was going to organize elections within a few months, so I should actually work towards not getting a proper Malian status, because my husband was a Malian, and that I should work on actually invoking my rights to Malian citizenship by marriage, so that no matter what government came and what relations they had with the Gambia government, I would still be secure and safe to live in Mali. So I now have a dual citizenship by marriage.
But without that Malian passport, you would have effectively been stateless, because you weren't
Technically, yes. Technically. And this passport did protect me at a later date. At some point, I can't really remember the dates. I had to travel, I guess it was 2013, to Zimbabwe, Harare, for a meeting organized by the African Capacity Building Foundation. And I was a panelist, so they had made all arrangements for me to pick up my visa on arrival, which I got on my Malian passport. And upon stepping out of the airport to get into a vehicle to go to the hotel, I was stopped by plainclothes state security, who asked me whether I was a Gambian too. And I said yes, because I've been asked this question in several airports, but this was the day I was to learn why. Apparently, I was on an international persons wanted list on the request of the Gambia government, that I was trying to destabilize the government of the Gambia. So I was detained at the airport, and they said that...
This is the airport at Harare?
Yeah, Harare International, yeah. So they said that they had to deport me to the Gambia because I was wanted for insulting the president, for sedition, for various things. So I said, I guess. So I sat there, and I had this old Nokia phone, and I decided to put my hands in my bag and send a message to the Malian Foreign Ministry to tell them that I was detained and that they were about to deport me to the Gambia. And so when I contacted the communications officer, she said, I don't have access to the minister, he's in a meeting, but he checks his messages whilst he's in meetings, so I would forward him your message, but I suggest you send it from your phone as well and indicate that it is very urgent, which I did, and the ministry responded within 5 minutes and told me to remain adamant that I was a Malian citizen and that he was contacting the ambassador in South Africa. They didn't have an embassy in Harare, which he did. The organizers of the meeting also came, and their board chair was Ndey Biti of the MDC, who was then the finance minister. He also got involved, and he later resolved the problem, I guess, with the Malian authorities, and asked me to take part in the meeting in Harare, which I refused. I told him, with all due respect, I can't, because I know that this is a police state as well, and I don't believe that I would be safe in a hotel. So I bought an air ticket and went back, an air ticket to Mali, but I slept in Addis, because this was like the longest day ever, because I left Bamako the night before to Nairobi, then to Harare, another 5-hour flight, a couple of hours, possibly 3-4 hours in detention, and then I went back to Addis. So I just went to sleep. And then when I woke up, I checked my emails briefly before I went to the airport and saw an email. I believe it was from Sekou. I guess it's Sekou Jame, but I didn't know him personally at the time, asking whether I was safe and that apparently I was being deported to the Gambia. So I guess it was a short reply anyway. I retorted that it wasn't true and that I wasn't scared of Jame. So I boarded a plane, and when I got to Lomé on transit, my office admin told me, your family is frantically looking for you. But at this point in time, I had said, when I get to Bamako, I'll explain what happened. I didn't want to worry anyone. So apparently it was published in a newspaper here that I was being deported to Gambia. And this got my family obviously very, very worried, because they were scared that one day would not know where I was held and that I could possibly be killed. So I called my mom from Lomé, and she was really upset that I did not think it necessary to tell them of my plight. And I said, don't worry, I'm on my way back to Bamako and everything has been resolved. But they were not happy that I didn't think it necessary to inform the family. So when I went back to Bamako, I had a meeting again with the foreign minister, who told me to be careful of which countries I visited, because Mali, like other countries, had received this alert that I was wanted, but that they were not going to act on it, but that other countries may.
So the government thought it was important enough to put you on a wanted list, and as a result of that, you limited the countries that you went to. What effect did it really have on your activities?
Well, I was certain that in West Africa it was quite unlikely that I would be sent back to the Gambia, because from meetings with various ECOWAS heads of state and with the ECOWAS Commission itself, it was clear that Jammeh was not taken seriously at ECOWAS. So in West Africa, I wasn't so concerned. I used to go a lot to Addis, but I curtailed my activities there, given that there were also media freedoms were not respected. So I started, obviously, looking carefully at where I could go and to which countries I would go, yeah.
So the Gambia government has targeted you on a number of occasions.
Yeah.
You talked about being on a blacklist, and so you couldn't renew your Gambian passport, ended up with a Malian passport. Now you've talked about being on a blacklist, which is why you were stopped when you went to Harare, and they wanted to deport you back to the Gambia. Did the Gambian government target you in any other way?
Oh, certainly. The Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time met with the Malian Foreign Minister first in Kampala, I believe this was 2011, and told the Foreign Minister that President Jammeh was not happy at all with Tete of Mali, because they were giving me a platform to destabilize the Gambia.
Who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Gambia at the time?
The current Minister, Mamadou Tangara.
Okay.
Yeah. And he did not stop at that. He had this conversation again with the minister, and he personally came to Mali to tell them that the president wanted me extradited to the Gambia, and that I was involved in activities, again, to destabilize the government. Technically, that I was organizing a coup d'etat. So the Malian Foreign Ministry, they have excellent relations with the press, by the way, told them that they were aware of my activities as coordinator of a regional journalism project, and that should the Gambia government have information as to other activities that were illegal, because Mali obviously also would not host people who are trying to overthrow supposedly legitimate government, then they could work with their Ministry of Justice. I believe this would have been difficult to prove, so they never wrote formally, but on 3 different occasions they made a request. He even did speak to the president about it as well.
How did you come to find out that the foreign minister, Mamadou Tangara, was the one trying to get you extradited from Mali back to the Gambia? How did you find out about it?
Well, on both occasions, on 2 occasions, I was invited to the foreign ministry to have a chat with foreign ministry officials. First, this is, I guess, after the Kampala meeting. They invited me to have a conversation, and, well, they were not hostile and not intimidating, neither threatening, but just to tell me that my government was concerned about my activities in Mali, and that should, in case I be involved in other activities, I should really try to lie low. And they went further to tell me that they knew that Jammeh was dangerous, and that he did have elements in Mali who were tracking me, so I should be concerned about my personal security. At this point in time, I was working closely with the International Federation of Journalists as well. So when they were aware of this meeting, they actually decided to pay for a private security firm for me. So I had 24-hour security at this point in time. And on a second occasion as well, I had a meeting with the foreign minister, the SEGAL, this is the Secretary General to the minister, the chief of staff, other people, senior officials in the ministry, to tell me actually that this was the purpose of the visit of your minister. He did do a press conference, but didn't talk about me when he was in Mali. I don't know for what reason. Maybe he talked about, I guess, cultural ties between Mali and the Gambia, and how he was of Malian origin and all of that, because I watched the press conference. But that basically, this was the intent of the Gambia government, and that they were waiting on them to send information, I guess a written request as well, but that I should go about my activities, and that the Malian government had no intention of sending me back to the Gambia.
So essentially it was because the Malian government supported you so much, that's why you didn't end up being deported?
Yeah. I guess still on attacks, right? In the Gambia, my mom's house was ransacked twice at least. On the first occasion, I happened to be at a meeting of the International Federation of Journalists, and they were quite concerned. So they issued a statement, and there was a lot of media attention. So I believe that provoked also a Gambia government reaction, and then they sent the TV and all of that to claim that it was not the Gambia government. But I'm sure it was, and it happened a second time.
Can you tell us what type of attack it was?
Well, they broke into my mom's house, turned around all the furniture, turned around all her jewelry, all her wardrobes, turned around the mattresses. So my belief is that possibly they were looking for information or documentation related to me. This is my belief, because they claimed that it was not them. But they did not, nothing was taken. There was money in the house, it wasn't taken. There was jewelry, it wasn't taken. So it clearly wasn't a theft. It was an attempt to look for something.
Do you recall when this incident occurred? What year?
Oh, right.
If you don't, that's fine.
I'm not, because as I told you earlier, my coping mechanism was really to address issues and just block them. And this process is helping me remember specific events, because I was actually quite concerned about the safety and security of my mom, and this and another incident at some point made me worry.
Before that, you mentioned that your mother's house was attacked on 2 occasions.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the second occasion?
It's similar to this, glasses broken, doors broken. It was not as drastic as the first one, but it was clearly an attempt to either threaten or intimidate.
And we're still talking about the attacks that you faced. I believe that later on you also received information about attempts that were made. I believe this would be a good time to talk about that, and then we can go back to your association, unless you want to speak about the association first.
Oh, no, I can proceed. I interviewed a jungler once. I had decided not to publish. I had discussed this with a few journalists, including Babagali Jallo.
A jungler, right?
Yes, a jungler.
And who are the junglers, just so we know?
Well, I guess it was a group of hitmen for Jame, or torturers if you want. And this jungler had actually met Dr. Jana in prison. They were in detention, him and another colleague, for more than 2 years. And Dr. Jana found them in prison, and they introduced themselves to him. And he told them, they were never brought to court, by the way. So Dr. Jana asked them to get a lawyer. So when they did, and their lawyer, I'm not going to use legal terms before I say the wrong terms, asked the court to ask the state to provide her clients, they released them the same night. When they did, one of the junglers called me and said that Dr. Jana said you could help me. I said, well, being that you're by the way, I used to communicate frequently with Dr. Jana when he was in prison. So I said, well, he told me too, but being that you were a jungler, you know the Gambia better than me. So if you leave, I'll meet you wherever you are, but I'm not helping you to leave. So he left for Dakar that same night and contacted me the next day. So I also flew out to Dakar and met him. So we spoke for a long period of time. We spoke between, I think, we met at 1 on a Friday and spoke till about 6 or 7. And I documented most of the things he told me.
So essentially you had an interview with this former jungler. Can you tell us some of the information he provided you, particularly in relation to planned attacks against journalists, as well as actual attacks against journalists?
Okay. Well, he confirmed to me on this day that it was the junglers who killed Ndey Haidara, that they were instructed by Yaya Jammeh, that he did not speak to Yaya Jammeh, but his boss was speaking to Yaya Jammeh permanently on the phone, that the interior minister at the time, I believe this would have been Usman Sonko, was aware, and that it was orchestrated by the state. He also told me that there was a list of journalists that should be dealt with. By dealt with, he meant killed. And that on that list, from what I remember, because I have this information, maybe I can try to get it to you. I certainly was there. Demba Jawa was there. Baba Gale, Data, who was already killed. and some other journalists, but I can send you this list. Then he asked me whether I knew Major Khalifa Bajinka, and I replied in the negative, which was not true. I did know him through my work, but I didn't know why he was asking, so I said, no, I don't know him. And he told me that I should thank him. If I do get to see him at some point, I should thank him for saving my life. And I said, how did he save my life? He told me of an event that took place in Sindola, in Kanilai, in which both myself and Demba Jao participated. It was a retreat organized by PROPAG. This is the Pro-Poor Advocacy Group. And Demba Jao, being the GPU president at the time, no, maybe he was not GPU, but being the GPU representative to the PROPAG board, was also invited, I guess, on the list of institutions that should be on the PROPAG board. The GPU was listed as a media representative. So I and Demba Jao were supposed to be picked up, and I said, so what would you have done to us? He said, you would have been killed that night. And he told me that I actually had 9 lives, because every time they attempted to get rid of me, apparently Bajinka told them that this was my younger sister. This was me, right? He came up to me and he spoke to me and told them that I know Ndey very well and this is her younger sister, it's not her. And he also told them that that was not Demba Jao, that they got their information wrong. On a separate incident,
do you actually remember having a conversation with Major
Yes,
Khalifa
I do.
Ben?
I actually also remember that he was overly nice to me the next day, and he asked me whether I wanted to visit President Jammeh's farm or garden or whatever it is that he has there. But he was super, super, super nice during that stay. I don't know whether it was to prove that it certainly wasn't me or something like that, but he was out of his way nice to me, yeah.
So there was a list of journalists that were supposed to be killed, essentially a hit list of journalists. Your name was there, as well as Ndey Jao and a few other people.
Yes.
And from what the jungler told you, it was because of Major Khalifa Bajinka that you weren't, in fact, killed on that occasion.
Yes.
And that you should thank him for doing that.
Yeah.
Please continue.
He told me of a specific incident, which could be true, because at this point in time, I was still resident in the Gambia. This would have been sometime in the middle of 2008. Waja, where I worked later, had an event on collective bargaining in Conakry, and he told me that I stayed in this hotel and in this room, and that they had planned to plant drugs in my bag, so that that they had already alerted the security at the police. This is the security agencies of the Gambia, and they had already worked with somebody who was in the hotel to actually plant drugs in my bag, so that I would have been arrested for possessing and smuggling of drugs into the Gambia, which meant automatically that the Gambia government would have made a request to get me extradited or sent back to the Gambia for trial.
And I just want to make sure this is clear. The hit list that you talked about, which had the names of journalists on it, did that jungler tell you how that list was created, or who ordered the creation of such a list?
Well, he told me that there should have been also a copy of this list at the NIA, but that this list was in the possession of their boss, which bosses have changed over several times. He did tell me that as well. So there would have been at least 2 copies of the list, yes. He said that the NIA also had a copy of the list.
I note that you may not want to reveal the name of this jungler that you had an interview with, but for the purposes of the Commission's work, could I ask the usher to bring you a paper so you can write the name, and then that will be available to the Commissioners?
Oh, sure, I'd be willing to do that. So the same jungler also tells me that whilst I was still working, at this point in time, the GPU's offices initially, when I became president, were still in Serekunda, near the market, and quite noisy. So we had decided to move to Newtown, and when we did, I knew for a fact that I was being followed all the time. And as I said, I had some element of security training and consciousness by Amnesty. So they had told me that whenever I felt that there was this face that I didn't know but which was familiar in settings that I go to, I should actually just approach the person so that they would have to change the person. Because once you knew or interacted with the person following you, it meant that you could identify the person. So whenever in GPU gatherings or around the GPU, they suddenly had a VU and stuff like that, I would actually just go and talk to them, greet them, how are you, kind of thing. But just to make sure that I knew, that they knew that I knew why they were there. So I also had those mechanisms. One scary thing that he told me was that they knew my car, and he also told me the number plate and the type of car, and that they wanted to, they had already infiltrated my garages, and not the garages himself, but they had somebody in there that
like a mechanic, your mechanic at the...
Yeah, they knew my mechanic, they knew where I took my car for service or for repairs.
But the infiltration was someone else within that?
Yeah, it was someone else, and that they had instructed that the next time my car goes there, they should actually loosen the bolts of the steering wheel so that I would actually lose control. And he confirmed to me that this was actually what they did to my Fati, the current advisor to the president, and that this is why he had an accident.
Sorry, just to make clear, this jungler told you that my Fati was actually, there was an attempt on his life, and that came from the junglers.
Them, yeah. So I guess this was just to confirm to me that such things did happen. It fortunately never happened to me because I saw an uncle of mine on the road. He had a car, but he was taking a taxi or something, waiting for public transport. And I said, "What are you doing here?" He said that he had issues with his car. So I drove him home, and I got up from my driving seat, and I said, "You use my car until you fix your car." So they assumed that I had either sold my car or something like that, because he said, "You talk like this, which I guess is what saved me.
So you've explained quite a number of attempts where the Gambian government targeted you, either to stop you from continuing with your activities, to cause injury and death on different occasions, to extraditing you, attempts to extradite you from other countries. Having heard all this information, having experienced some of them, and then having heard the information that the jungler provided to you, how did you feel about your safety and security at that point?
Well, I was a bit rattled, but I think I was even more rattled by what he told me after the issues relating to the journalists. Because I was staying in a hotel by the ocean when I went to meet him. I did not give him my location because I knew that he was a jungler. So even though I sat with him for long hours, I did not trust him. And I told two friends, and this was also a strategy that I had. Whenever I went into a country based on information that I knew, I would always contact colleague journalists who were working in that country to tell them I was coming, I was on this flight, and I was, just in case nobody ever found me. So before meeting the jungler, I told the editor of a newspaper who's a personal friend of mine, and another Senegalese rapper who we developed very good relations with, because we used to do, during the CCG campaigns, we even did CDs and used Senegalese rappers to do songs on the Gambia, just so that we would raise awareness in Senegal as well on the human rights situation in the Gambia. So he offered me a pen recorder that he had, and security, because he had security. So the security was out, and my journalist friend was supposed to call me every hour just to make sure that it was not a trick to actually get me back to the Gambia, because this had happened before. Attempts to get journalists out of Senegal did happen.
Can you tell us a bit about that? What are some of the examples that you recall of attempts to get journalists out of other countries back into the Gambia?
Well, there's the case of Yaya Damfa. Yaya was actually arrested in the Gambia with Amnesty International staff. He's the one who reported that Chief Mane was seen in Fatoto and was helping Amnesty International staff on the ground document human rights abuses in the Gambia. So he was arrested alongside 2 Amnesty staff, one of whom was a U.S. national and the other an American Tanya. The Nigerian British was Ayodele Amin, with whom also I developed a very close working relationship. Because when they were at the police, I was the only one who went in person first to visit them to try to find out why they were arrested. And he asked me to inform some of the authorities, which I did. And so after that, we obviously became friends. And they refused to leave so long as Yaya was not also released, because based on different interventions, they were actually asked to leave. But they knew that if they left Yaya Damfa there, it could possibly mean that he would be killed or he would disappear like Chief Mane. So they did not leave him there. So they proposed to Yaya to actually move to Senegal and offered some kind of protection mechanism whilst he was waiting for a visa to move to an EU capital. And so on this particular day, I believe Yaya came back from work or somewhere, and when he got into his apartment in Dakar, somebody put a gun to his head and told him to leave. And he was very smart, because I would have tried to possibly move around, but he followed them to the road. And when they asked him to get in the boot of the car, he started calling thief, thief. And so they had to run away and leave him there. So there were all these attempts to actually get journalists from Dakar. I don't know how they intended to get him back to the Gambia, but they also knew all these back routes, or possibly they would have killed and dumped him in Senegal. I really have no clue what their intention was, but I was aware of all these attempts. And given that the jungler said many nice things about Dr. Jana and how he gave them courage to go to the courts and all of that, it could also have meant that Jame could have used them to infiltrate us. So I was quite cautious of my interactions with him. And after this day, I left back to Bamako. But when I went back to the hotel, I was scared. I was scared not only because of what he told me, but because of the different types of methods that he told me that they used to eliminate people. So for the first thing that I did was I put on my AC, and then I remembered what he told me, which was quite stupid because they could not have known where I was. But I switched off the AC immediately, and I slept all night like that, because he told me that they had actually the capacity to put cyanide as gas into the AC and kill you in your sleep. So I was really fretting. There's the noise of the palm trees at the hotel, and this was the first time ever that I freaked out because of Jame, and also because of the other brutalities that he told me. He told me that as a jungler himself, including the execution, if you want to put it that way, of West African nationals, including the 44 Ghanaians, he was there, and in total, he had witnessed almost 100 killings. So this was the first time that I realized, actually, I'm no different from the so-called Jame relatives that were killed. I'm not different from the Ghanaians that he assumed were mercenaries. This is what the jungler told me, that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, because they were in the Gambia, I believe, on July 21st evening, or they were discovered by security forces on a July 21st evening in a boat, unarmed. So when they were initially arrested and Jame was aware of this, he thought that they were mercenaries who were sent to overthrow him, and they were then taken to the NIA and instructed to execute them. So, and all of them, except for the last batch, because he told me that they were put in different pickups and all of that. But the last batch, by the time they picked them up, and they were all killed in Kanilai, were killed somewhere along Sanyang or another beach, because it was almost daybreak, and they did not want to be seen with those individuals. This is why they tried to kill them by the beach, and this is how one of them escaped. So based on the chilling information that he gave me, I actually did realize that possibly I was actually a fool, right, to be taking a stance on somebody who could easily, just because he did not agree with you, decide that you should be killed.
The Commission intends to have a hearing on the junglers at some point, but I just wanted to find out from you, what were some of the types or some of the methods that he talked about, the methods they used to actually kill people, kill Gambians?
Well, he told me that they used vinegar also as a tool.
Vinegar?
Yeah.
How would they use that?
Well, he asked me, do you mind? And he actually touched me here. I guess he was trying to touch my jugular vein or something like that. And he said, this is where we would have injected the vinegar, and within 3 to 6 hours, you would die. I did not know that vinegar kills. And I asked him, I looked at him in the face, and I said, would you have raped me before that? And then he looked down, and he said, no. I said, but I know that rape was a tool, so if you rape older women, why would you not rape me? And he did not. He didn't say anything, but I guess he was uncomfortable. So I apologized to him, and I said, "Okay, you could tell me other things. Don't worry. This is not personal." So we continued our conversation. He told me when he described how they killed the Ghanaians on the beach. I just freaked out because they used machetes, they used nails. The ones who were killed in Kanilai possibly had an easier fate because most of them were shot. And he told me of this young man who begged them. And he said, I have money. You can take my money and just let me go. And they took his money and they still killed him. So it was just scary. He told me about the ACs. He told me about the cars that were fiddled with. And he actually did say to me, you would not believe that there are some Gambians who died and people actually believe it is a natural death, and it was us. And he told me that they had training from an Italian, that they had training from Libyans, that they had training from, I believe, Turkish. And he actually gave me some pictures of their training ground. And he told me that they used live ammunition when they were being trained. I said, why? He said this was to increase your level of courage. So they would actually be asked to shoot at each other.
That's very chilling information.
It is.
You have committed to provide us with this information, which we will look into further as part of our hearings. I just wanted to ask one question about Yaya Damfa. You talked about the attempts to basically arrest him and take him back to the Gambia. Just to be clear, was the belief that it was by security forces of the Gambia, or individuals linked to the Gambian government?
We were aware that the Gambian government had elements working in Senegal. Whether these elements were Gambians or Senegalese, I would not know, but I know that at even higher levels, Jammeh had indeed infiltrated the security of Senegal.
Did your activities within the organizations that you told us about, so CCG as well as CSAG, is it? Did those activities result in any of your members being arrested?
CCG obviously technically died a natural death, but because there was CSAG, we were able to undertake various activities, including legal actions on behalf of for example, the death row inmates. Because Dr. Jana was in prison as at the time of the executions, it was actually CCG that broke the information on the executions.
So perhaps before that, why don't you tell us about what led to Dr. Jana's arrest?
Well, apparently we had broken the law by printing and distributing T-shirts that said "End to Dictatorship Now." So we were tried for sedition and treason because we printed 100 T-shirts.
So at that time, you were out of the country. You were charged for that.
Yeah.
And Dr. Jana ended up in jail as a result.
Yes, Dr. Jana, and unfortunately, 3 printers. Michael Uche Thomas, he was a Nigerian national. He ended up dying in prison because of pneumonia. 2 other young Gambians, one Jalo, and it's been a while now.
In your statement, you referred to Modu Keita and Ibrahim Jallo.
Yeah,
is that
Modu
correct?
Keita and Ibrahim Jallo. They were all sentenced alongside alongside Dr. Jana for having printed T-shirts for us. Obviously, because I was away, we could engage the services of a lawyer for them, because they had absolutely nothing to do with CCG.
Just to be clear, can you just state the full name of Dr. Jana so it's clear in the record?
It's Amadou Sketra Jana.
So all of these individuals were, 4 of them, were arrested. Mm-hmm. And at some point you engaged a lawyer, you said for the 2 individuals, meaning or for all of them?
For all of them. Initially, I was not aware of their arrest because Dr. Jana was underground and made those arrangements. So I had contacted, because I used to speak to Dr. Jana at least twice a day when we were engaged in our CCG activities. At some point in time, I asked him to leave. And he said, why? I said, because they know that most of the activities you're financing, and they're closing down on you, because they even offered him a government contract to supply the NIA with material. But it was all a ploy, and he knew it was a ploy, and he told me that he would give them rubbish equipment. I said, this is too bold a move to take. And he told them to supply them with the equipment. He needed to go into the NIA and look at their premises. But this was also to give information to the CCG on what was going on in the NIA. He didn't see much, though, because obviously they were also plotting against him. So I asked him at this point in time to leave, because for me it didn't make sense that they offered him a contract. And he said that he was going to stay, which he did, and we organized this event, I guess, in May. It was probably Africa Liberation Day, where we organized an event at the UTG. And Dr. Jana, he's a happy-go-lucky man, right? He was distributing T-shirts in the street in the university. And this is why he was arrested. And when he was arrested, they apparently even knew who printed the T-shirts because he never named them. So they picked them up. And I wasn't aware of that, but I was aware immediately of his arrest because he didn't call me that evening and he didn't call me the next day. So I contacted staff of the GPU and I said, could you please call Dr. Jana's number because I've been calling him and I'm not getting him. And he did. I said, could you go to his office? And so this guy went. He didn't get to the office because he retreated and he called me back. He said, there's security personnel everywhere and they're wearing this black hood over their heads. What he did not know and I did not know at that time was they had already arrested him like 24 hours before and had actually taken him back to his office to search the premises, which is why there was this large security personnel outside the premises of the office. So I contacted a lawyer immediately, and possibly for months on end, we could not find him. So the lawyer tried the police stations, tried the NIA, and they all denied that they had arrested him, but obviously they had arrested him. And from that day, I got back into the fighting mode, so I started writing press releases, doing press conferences, traveling all over West Africa again to see if I could get him released. He also had U.S. nationality, so I wrote to the U.S. Embassy. His wife was Senegalese, so I met up with the Senegalese authorities and just tried to do as much as I could just to locate him in the first instance. So months later, he was charged and brought to court in chains, hands and legs chained, and like he was treated like an animal. they would be yanking him on and off a truck, right? And so basically, I guess because it was treason charges, they somehow believed that the T-shirts would transform to guns. I certainly don't know what they were thinking, but this is how he was treated. And the CCG, I guess, was the government believed that the CCG was some sort of rebel movement because we were talking about peaceful change.
Do you recall when these events occurred? Maybe the year, perhaps the month, if possible, or the months?
Would it be 2011? I'm assuming yes.
In your statement, it says 2011.
It would be 2011, and he was eventually tried 2012 or end of 2011, because we looked for him for months. End of 2011, the trial started.
Apart from Dr. Jana and the 3 other individuals you named, you told us you were charged. Were any other individuals charged as well?
Certainly. Matthew K. Jallo, he's based in the U.S. He was also a member of the CCG executive. And Famaradem, he was also charged. Demba or Famarademba? Demba.
Can you tell us what was the result of those charges? Were they eventually convicted? To how many? What was the term?
Well, they were eventually convicted to life imprisonment. Dr. Jana was to serve almost 2 years in prison. But again, as in the GPU case, I was aware from a very early stage, particularly when I got involved in GPU matters, actively involved in GPU matters, that one thing that the Gambia government was very good at was creating a problem, but not so good at solving the problem. So I always thought that you should move ahead of them. And this is why whenever I was informed of an arrest, and this is way back even before I left the Gambia, the first thing I would do is go to the police or get a lawyer and start granting interviews. Because that meant the person could not disappear, which happened in some cases. And it also meant that the government knew that everybody was watching. And this was, again, the strategy that I employed with Dr. Jana, and I made sure that I met as many leaders in the region as possible.
So Dr. Jana, you said, was convicted.
Yes.
You said his prison term was for how long?
He had a life imprisonment.
Life imprisonment.
Yeah.
Was there a remark by the judge of that case regarding his imprisonment?
Was there a remark? I was not on the ground and I did not attend trial, so I would get I was getting regular feedback from the legal team, but it was generally summaries. As I said, Dr. Jana is quite stubborn like myself, and we found a way within the prison system, despite the fact that he was in a maximum security wing, to communicate on Skype, on WhatsApp. Was it WhatsApp? What we definitely did Skype conversations and a lot of SMSs. And he informed me of first the threats of jamming, because I had this habit not to watch GRTS because it was tasteless. So I only watched GRTS when somebody asked me to watch because there was a particular program that they thought I would be interested in, but GRTS was not on my menu for programs to watch.
In your statement, it states that the judge, Emmanuel Neka, stated that he would have preferred to give Jana a death sentence had it been permitted on the Gambian law. Do you recall that?
Yes, he did, because we had this also in a PR. You're right, he did. Because the CCG issued press releases every time that Dr. Jana went to court, talking about the state of detention, the inhumane and degrading manner in which he was treated, and even the manner that the trial judges comported themselves, yes. So this would have been a direct quote from the trial judge, yeah.
So you told us that Dr. Jana was sentenced to life imprisonment. For the other individuals, what were their sentences, if you recall?
I I should recall, because it was quite serious as well. They did not get life. I'm not sure they had life imprisonment, but they also had extremely harsh sentences based on the fact that they printed seditious material.
In your statement, because I know you went back into your records to put some of this information together. In your statement, it states that they were each sentenced to 3 years of hard labor. Is that what you recall?
That is true, but even before the end of the first year, I want to believe, Michael Uche Thomas died of pneumonia in prison, and it was also due to the fact that he did not get medical attention.
What was the reaction of the international community to this particular case?
Well, most people were shocked. As I said, I traveled a lot in West Africa and still do, and despite the fact that there are regimes that can be quite authoritarian, protests and T-shirts and even making unsavory remarks about the head of state are generally just ignored by authorities. So first, I was much younger than this and a very skinny young woman at that, so they were surprised that that I had all these troubles and that actually Jammeh saw me as his enemy. This was the reaction of ECOWAS officials. It was the reaction of foreign leaders that I would meet. Does Yahya Jammeh think you could overthrow him? Actually, he does. And I guess they started to realize the seriousness of this. But also Dr. Jana being in prison was quite a bad thing for the CCG. But it was an excellent thing for the situation on prisons, because he would give me information on a prisoner who was beaten and died, and then we would issue a statement. He would give me details on just the conditions within the prisons, and we made sure that this information came out. And he also used to write using another name, and it was published by the Daily News.
From prison?
Yes.
As a result of his presence in the prison, did you receive any information about an incident that was to occur to prisoners at the time?
Yes. Well, before the incident, Dr. Jana sent me an SMS probably around midnight on Tabaski of 2012, I would believe, and informed me that prisoners were worried by the statements of President Jammeh. As I said earlier, I hardly watch GRTS, and at some point, I must admit, especially after what happened to Dr. Jana, I almost gave up on my activism on Gambia because I was so frustrated that you speak out for people, and I would have people who would never comment, but once a parent was arrested or something like that, would actually contact me by email or telephone and say that, oh, they arrested my father, can you do a press conference? I'm like, you must be crazy, right? Why don't you do the press conference? So at some point, I felt that people wanted always the easy way out, because I would think that if my father was arrested, I would hold a protest outside State House, right? So this is me, though, but I would expect people to be willing to at least make that effort. So they would want, oh, can you please call Alintin? Alintin was at the time the head of RADO, which is a Senegalese human rights institution, but he was also a very good personal friend of mine who I would later have some issues with based on the executions, but I could come to that later. And so I felt that even when Gambians suffered, they wanted somebody else to fight for them. They did not want to take the lead in fighting for themselves. And this kind of made me a little bit wary of my interventions and who I would support or not. But I would guide people and tell them, if you do if you're willing to speak, I'll organize a press conference for you. For example, I could get you a lawyer, but how much are you going to pay? The rest I would raise. Stuff like that, just to make sure that people also understood that the fight was a common fight, that I could not come back home, that I was seen to be a terrorist, that I had to curtail my movements to fight for those rights that they wanted me to defend right now. So I had taken this approach of doing my advocacy, but on a different level. So he sent me this SMS, and I guess this was the first Tabaski that I had without without my family possibly, because my family also made sure that feasts were always a nice event for me and somebody would travel out. So I sent him back an SMS and said, so what do I care if security chiefs are worried about Yahya Jammeh's threats? Because I knew for a fact that he had a life imprisonment and he was not on death row.
What was the threat exactly?
Well, apparently Jammeh had said that he was going to execute people who were on death row, referring, I guess, to the spate of murders and other incidents of, I don't know what Jammeh's thinking was, but these were basically his remarks. But apparently the feeling in the prison was that this was a threat directed at security personnel or officials who were sentenced for either treason or other things based on acts that the Gambia government claimed they had undertaken. So Dr. Jana, then I did not respond, but around 2 a.m., like my conscience pricked me and said, like, this guy is in mile 2 where you could have been, and he's sending you an alert and you're not saying anything. So I sent him back an SMS and I said, what did Jammeh say? Obviously he knew I'd never watched GRTS, and he said, can you talk? I said, yeah. So we had a late night chat, and he said, I was worried that you have started your craziness because I was not going to have a shower tomorrow, because he had apparently written on his body the names of the death row inmates and when they were sentenced and why they were sentenced. So he said, are you willing to work? I said, yeah, sure. So let's do the list then. And this is actually the list that ended up being the official list of the Gambia government for death row inmates. So we did that this particular night.
So from what you've said, there was this threat from the president, Jammeh at the time. Mm-hmm. Then Dr. Jana, who was in prison, managed to find the names of the inmates who were supposed to be killed at that time or had been killed?
No, not yet. We had not even reached the executions yet. This was just after Jammeh's threat. Apparently there was this fear. Everybody thought it was going to be me. Everybody on death row, but particularly the security personnel, thought that this threat was actually directed at them. And also, given the fact that they knew Jammeh better, they had worked closely with him, they possibly knew what he was capable of and were visibly worried, because Dr. Jana has a sense of humor. Like, even in trouble, he said, all the big guys are trembling, like, please help. And I said, what do they want me to do? Like, when we were having the conversation, because we had to have a very long call on the names, the crimes. Some names were similar, and I'll come to that later, because at some point I made an error somewhere, because there were 2 death row inmates who had the same name but convicted for different crimes. So when we got this list, I said, okay, I'll sleep and think about it, but for me, it was just another Yahya Jammeh tantrum or attention-seeking attempt, right? So,
just to interrupt you, so was the list a list of all the death row inmates or a selected?
Some 44 death row inmates, yeah. So Dr. Jana had to write all over his body, and he was worried that I was going to act a bit erratic until he took a shower, and then he could not take the details again.
You actually provided us with a list of the death row inmates, so I will just provide a copy to the commissioners while I ask the usher to bring a copy to you. Okay. And then you can continue telling us, because it's from this list that a number of individuals were then executed.
Yeah. So, Dr. Jana, so we were communicating, yeah, that's... Yeah.
Do you recognize it? Is it that list that you provided to us?
Yes. On this, it's on a CSAG letterhead, but I will explain how this came about. Initially, it was just a plain list. So I was thinking of how to deal with emotions of people in prison, because Jammeh had actually not acted on his threat. And sometimes I would communicate regularly with Dr. Jana, and sometimes we would go for days without communicating because of some prison searches. So when there was a search, he would have to give up his phone and stuff like that. So when the executions took place, he sent me an SMS maybe around 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. To tell me initially that 8 people were executed, but that it included one Dabo. And I sent a message and I said, how do you know Dabo was involved? He said, well, actually, when they were taking him away, he said that at some point they had told them that there was a lockdown and that there was going to be a search, but nothing happened. And then when they went to sleep, they just heard cars coming to the prison and a lot of noise. So doors were opened, and this Dabo was adjacent to him, one, but also Dabo called out and said, Dr. Jana, they're taking us to kill us. Please tell your friend that they're taking us to kill us. So he, at this point in time, he knew that Dabo was involved, and he knew also from prisoners who cooked in their kitchen somewhere, which is apparently from his description in the yard, that they saw 8 body bags and that there was blood. So certainly that these were the people who were taken out. So, but it was not yet daylight, and this day they were not, I guess, taken out of their cells. But he could count some, and he was chatting with a neighbor. So they were sure that it was 8, and they were calling out to each other. So they were sure that it was definitely 8 persons. It's later that we learned about Tabara Samba. He learned that later in the day, because apparently even prison staff were visibly shocked and trembling and crying because they had never seen anything like that. At that point, and to this day, he clearly doesn't know what happened or where they were killed. So we spoke again that morning, and he gave me the list of 8 individuals. As I said, at this point in time, Tabara was not there. So I drafted a statement, and I contacted Amnesty International. As I said, organizations that I work with, Article 19, other groups. I contacted RADO because there were 2 Senegalese nationals, and I again tried to raise alarm. Because these people thought I could help them, I contacted a Malian lawyer and another French lawyer and a Ghanaian lawyer to ask whether we could take this case to the ECOWAS courts to try to get a stay of execution, so that the others would not suffer the same fate. And as I said, on this list of persons that I issued, there's a name that comes up twice, but for different convictions. So I had actually said it was this other person, but it wasn't. So Dr. Jana again called me around 11 to say, but you made a mistake. This person did not die. It's this person who died. So we issued a rejoinder. But this statement I did not issue in the name of CCG because I knew for a fact that if I did, Dr. Jana would be the next person to be executed. So I contacted Bankamane of CSAG, and I contacted Amnesty International, who obviously had to do their own vetting processes and were speaking to other inmates. But I felt like, personally, I thought the next night there would be more executions. So we decided to issue the PR that people were actually executed in Malta prisons.
And in fact, I believe you were the first organization to release that information to the public.
Yeah.
I have a copy of the press release. I'll just bring it around to you, and also so we can read the names out into the record.
Okay.
Can you provide the witness with 1 copy and 1 for the commissioners? Thank you. So for the record, it is a press release from the Civil Society Associations Gambia. It was released on the 24th of August, 2012. The title is CSAG confirms execution of 9 death row inmates, calls for an immediate stop to executions. Perhaps I should read the first 2 paragraphs, which also includes the names. It states, the Civil Society Association Gambia can confirm that 9 death row inmates at the Mile 2 Central Prisons were executed between the night of August 23rd and the morning of August 24th, 2012. The 9, including 2 Senegalese nationals, are Lamin B. Dabo, Aliou Ba, Lamin Jaju, Dauda Bojang, Abubakar Yabo. Is this who you were referring to as Dabo, or is it Yabo?
It was a Yabo. I'm trying to find which name I made errors with, but there was a name which appears twice here, but it's 2 different individuals. Yeah.
I'll continue reading. Abdoulaye Sonko, Lamin F. Jame, Jibril Ba, who's Senegalese, and Tabara Samba, Senegalese. And it states here that she was female, meaning the only woman out of the 9 inmates. Is that correct?
Yes.
The press release goes on to state, it is still unclear exactly which location the executions took place in and what method of execution was used. What is, however, clear is that inmates were rounded up at 9:30 p.m. Thursday, August 23rd, and that by the morning of August 24th, the bodies were actually lying in the Mile 2 prison yard. It is also confirmed that the families of the death row inmates are yet to be contacted. And the press release goes on. I will read the last 3 paragraphs, because a lot of the text also goes on to call on the authorities of various countries to intervene in order to stop the continuation of executions. Thereafter, you state, we call on all Gambians, in particular the families of the death row inmates, religious and political leaders, human rights groups, journalists, and the legal fraternity to stand up together and say, enough is enough. All Gambians must do something in our little way to ensure that the necessary actions are taken to ensure that our bloodthirsty dictator does not get away with murder. May the souls of the unfairly executed rest in perfect peace. Amen. At the time, what was the sentiment of CSAG and yourself in relation to the process that these individuals had gone through, and what was it that was really at issue in terms of their executions?
Well, for us, as I said, at this point in time, we could not really be meeting as a group, but on a personal level, that the president threatens to execute is not an instruction to execute, one, and that executions should go through normally a procedure. Yes, they were sentenced to death. This was one. Secondly, that the Gambia had a moratorium on the death penalty, I believe, from the 80s. So even to invoke that would have meant at least some procedure, which never took place. That when death row inmates are executed, the very minimum decency requires that their family members be involved in this process. So none of this actually took place, and the manner in which they were taken out of the Mile 2 prisons, not only because they died, but the other prisoners who were in the prison were actually frightened out of their lives, because everybody assumed that they were the next target. And as I said, Dr. Jana has this humor that is infectious. And he would tell me, oh, I'm a king today. I did not even have to queue to go to the toilet, because they had to queue, because they all wanted me to contact you so bad. So they actually were so nice to him, because, and facilitating in some instances our communication, because they felt at this point in time we were the only group that could help them. So they would tell him to call, they gave numbers of their family members, they gave numbers of their lawyers. Initially, when he contacted me on Tobaski night, somewhere, even though they were scared, they told him that they did not want to anger the former president by getting me involved. So they would talk to their lawyers. So they were not a part of the group that we were supposed to. He gave me the entire list, but some people had reservations as to receiving support from CCG, CSAG. But when the executions happened, everybody on the list gave a contact number of either a family member or a lawyer, all of whom I contacted on this day. And as I said, I had meetings one-to-one and phone calls with lawyers across the sub-region to see how we could take the case to ECOWAS within that week, just to ensure that no more executions took place, which is basically what we did.
And what happened as a result of that?
Well, I guess it was, we had the first hearing, and I'm not sure there was a decision on this case because it continued. The Gambia government did not appear at the first few instances, and the court actually made a ruling that whether they appeared or not, they were going to proceed with the hearing. I was, now I'm losing the legal terms because I was dealing with French lawyers. I was also one of the complainants in this case. I guess I was the first complainant, and then CSAG as an institution, and some family members to whom I must give credit. I contacted this lady. Her name is Linda. I guess her husband was a soldier, and when I told her that we wanted to take the case, she just said, yes, I'm in. I said, I would need your personal details, and you may have to appear as a witness at the ECOWAS court. And she said, yes, I am willing. And I thought that was a rare act of bravery, given her background and the fact that she was living in the country. And we communicated. We had some resistance from some of their lawyers, because I don't know for what reason, because some of the lawyers were on this pro bono, some were paid, but mostly we just made arrangements for their trips to Abuja and accommodation. So people were actually willing to come on board. When we issued the statement, the Senegalese government sent a delegation to the Gambia. They had a meeting with the former president. Senegalese human rights groups were represented, and President Jana told them that no executions took place. And I remember they did like a media interview or a press conference after this meeting with the president, and as I said, a human rights activist friend of mine was a part of this delegation, and I said, did you really believe that? He said, but why would he lie? I said, if you said something and your president said something, I probably would believe you, right? I know for a fact that these killings took place. And later, when Amnesty and others all issued statements, the Gambia government actually confirmed that the executions did take place, but that they did not take place, that they actually took place 2 days after the date that we said. But it was quite weird because they actually did confirm the same people that we said were killed, which was rather foolish, because why would you kill the same persons that I accused you of killing if you did not kill them the day that I said you killed them? But the good thing for us was that the government actually, because the international outcry was enormous, and at some point they had to come out.
I'd like to move on to another topic. While you were in Mali, I believe you stayed in Mali throughout your the period that you were away in exile. Do you recall any Gambians coming to Mali fleeing from human rights violations? If you do, perhaps just give us an idea of the scope of violations that we're talking about, and a few examples.
Can I not name names? I can write some names for you, maybe. Yes, I hosted journalists. I hosted security personnel, police, army, close protection of the former president, and they all stayed in my house. And I have this friend who told me that I was crazy to actually bring security personnel running away from Jame to live with me. But at this point in time, I really was not thinking of the risks, but I was thinking more of the safety and security of these individuals. I remember I met one of them in Dakar. He had just fled from the Gambia the night before. And again, Bankamani of CSAG asked me to meet this person who was running away. I was actually on transit to Nigeria. So I went to look for the guy and with a friend of mine and told him that I was actually traveling to Abuja, but I just wanted to see if he was okay and whether he needed anything. And he already had his bags packed as soon as I contacted him. And he said, but they told me you're going to help me. And I said, listen, I'm traveling. But he was visibly scared. And I felt so sorry for him, but he was like this hefty, big security personnel. And I said, so do you think that if Yaya Jammeh came, I could stop him? But if you insist, I can send you to Bamako today, but I'm not in Bamako. So he said that I was not leaving him where I found him. So we went to the travel agent. I bought him a ticket, and I sent him to Bamako and called my office staff to tell them to pick him up at the airport. And my colleague tells me that he had his name on a piece of paper, and this guy is running away from Yaya Jammeh. But I didn't explain, because most of the things I did not explain to my staff, because they would have been also too worried, because they actually used to hang around in our office area. But I knew, and I saw, sometimes it was so dumb, BJL number plates parked on the other side of the street from my office. Anyway, so this guy has the guy's name, and he's standing there at the airport, and the guy walks past him, obviously, and waits until everybody leaves, and he tells him, because he was so scared that he was followed from the car, and interactions with these people would actually later make me discover that, because I had no close contact per se with Jammeh and his close circuit, I had the free mind to move around, and some of these people were actually so paranoid, so paranoid that if I don't see them for days, eventually they would move out. I would, for the journalists, we had this package in my office which did not exist, but we managed to find funding to have a safe house for journalists running away. So for journalists, it was easy for me to justify using the office budget to support them. But for security personnel, it had to be a personal matter. Some of them did not want to go to the UNHCR. Eventually, when I got married, I had to find a separate property so that I could be hosting Gambians there. We also had a restaurant where they used to work to at least do something, because it would have been quite weird to just have strangers living in one compound and nobody going out. So we had to find also mechanisms of getting some decoy in place. In some instances, Malian authorities knew that Gambian security personnel were there, and they contacted my husband and told him that these people had to leave. But in all instances, we made arrangements for their safe passage out of Mali.
And just very briefly, can you tell us the types of human rights violations they were fleeing from? Like, was it, you mentioned attempts to try and arrest you and extradite you. What types of, what were they fleeing from, essentially? What did they think could happen to them?
Well, one of them particularly was running from Jammeh himself. He claimed that Jammeh used to attack him physically and even stabbed him. So this was, he was directly fleeing from Jammeh. Others were fleeing from persecution related to trials or unfair trials that they were named in. Journalists, one of them was running away because he was apparently linked with Chief Mane, or undertaking an investigation in relation to the disappearance of Chief Mane. So it was various issues, some just generally out of fear. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'm seeking guidance at this point because I have a couple of questions to ask, and then from my end, I would have concluded my questioning. So if we go over for a few minutes, that would allow us to actually conclude with the witness, if that's agreeable to the commissioners.
Thank you. Absolutely. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. Being in exile for all that period, you've mentioned, I think, about 9 years. You've talked about the attempts to basically get at you in one way or another. You've talked about engaging in activities in the Gambia, being away from your family, helping other people who were fleeing, getting engaged essentially in the struggles of others. What impact did these experiences in total have on you and your family?
Personally, as I said, beyond the 2 incidents, my first meeting with a jungler and possibly the extradition attempt, each time I had a face-to-face with the authorities, I actually felt stronger. Maybe this is weird, but it strengthened my resolve to fight. My family, I'm extremely lucky. My family supported me through thick and thin. I never had any pressure to stop the kind of work that I was doing or stop involvement in anything under Gambia. Instead, they actually tried to make my life in exile as comfortable as possible. All my family members visited me, grandparents, nieces, nephews, siblings, my mom, my aunties, each and every feast, beyond 1 or 2 exceptions. I had a family member with me. We would meet up in Senegal. If I told them I had meetings in Senegal, which would last for a few days, somebody would come up. My mom spent long periods of time with me in Bamako and would generally only come back if she had events or family matters to attend to. So all in all, and I had very good friends along the way, Malian friends, senior government officials. I have a Malian mother, I have a Malian husband. So technically it was difficult for me, but at the same time it was a lot easier for me than many of other people who had to be in exile. I was also lucky that I had a job with a regional organization, so finances certainly wasn't a problem. I ended up spending all my money fighting Jammeh, and eventually when I got married, all my husband's money fighting Jammeh, because I would be literally begging him to pay for legal fees of people that he did not even know. But for me, it was necessary. My family were affected in a way, but nobody ever showed me that they were worried or they were scared. And my mom, I could tell sometimes when I spoke to her on the phone, she would say, especially when we discovered that they were listening to conversations that I had with my family. So she would say, well, everybody knows that my child is not a criminal. The big criminal is here, and everyone. She never said names, but she would sometimes make references like that. I had a grandmother who's here. She's still around, who would always introduce herself as the grandmother of Ndey Sosseh, just to make sure that she made a statement. One of my aunties told me that what bothered her most was that people didn't want to say my name, including some extended family. They would tell her, like, she also deliberately made sure that publicly or wherever she would link her association proudly. So I believe that I'm one of those lucky few who had no pressures, despite what they were facing underground as well, so that I wouldn't quit. They did not want me to quit. I have a fighting family as well.
One issue that I would like you to address, and perhaps it's better for you to address that in your closing remarks. It's on recommendations that you would have in relation to the media sector. But one question I have for you before I close is, being in exile sometimes has certain repercussions or difficulties. And I understand that you are involved in a particular situation where someone who was in exile was denied return, in terms of the family was denied access to the person's body in order to bury them in Gambia. Can you tell us about that?
I want to believe this would be Kukoy Sambasanyang. We talked about extraditions, and he was one of the persons who actually was also extradited from Senegal to Mali. I did not know him before, and growing up as a child, Kukoy Sambasanyang was like this big name. So when I was contacted by colleagues in Dakar, I was not in Mali at the time, and I told them that I was somewhere, either in Nairobi or somewhere, and that when I came back, I would try to reach out to him. I forgot completely, and then weeks later, he was given my number by someone, and he did call me, and I apologized for not reaching out and told him that I would go and see him. But he said no, that he was going to come. I should tell him where I was. So I said, don't worry, I'll send you my driver, and he'll bring you to my office, which the driver did. I also had a very, very lengthy conversation with him. I was pleasantly surprised that he did not look like a monster, because this is the image that I had in my head. He was quite soft-spoken, and he told me also of attempts to his life. He told me about the situation that led to his extradition, that he came with little or no belongings, and that he was only sent to Mali because in the middle of the airport he started screaming that I am Kukoy Sambasanyang. He has a different name on his travel documents, but he kept screaming in the middle of Dakar airport that he is Kukoy Sambasanyang, and that they're trying to send him back to the Gambia. So eventually he was put on a KQ flight, I guess, or Ethiopian flight to Bamako, and dropped off at the airport. But at this point in time, he did not tell me that he needed medicines. He did tell me that he was taking medicines because he was poisoned, apparently by Jana operatives, and that they had on several occasions tried to kill him, and even to get him back to the Gambia from Guinea-Bissau. He named some senior security official who went to Bissau and actually even got him on a plane. But I have another journalist friend who also confirmed this, Alan Yerombalo. He's a Guinea-Bissau journalist, and he used to be my board chair at some point, who told me that when he was informed, he's the one who actually alerted their authorities as to the dangers linked to Kukoy's extradition, and they got him off the plane. So we had this wide-ranging conversation on meetings that he had with Jammeh, and how Jammeh told him one day in Kanilai that if you tried to do to me what you did to Jawara, I would drink tea from your skull. So we had this long conversation, and he was also pleasantly surprised that there were young Gambian women who were willing to sacrifice their comfort and all of that just to fight. This was the only time that we met, unfortunately, because I do travel a lot. And at some point, I was contacted by this young man who came with him to my office to tell me that he died. I said, what? He said, yes, he died, but he said that I should give you these documents. So the guy came with a laptop and his ID and all of that. And he asked me what were they to do. I said, what did he want? He said he wanted to go back to Senegal. So when I checked his ID, it was actually a Senegalese ID. So I contacted the ambassador. But because when he was deported, he kept saying that he was Kukoy Sambasanyang and granting interviews, the Senegalese wanted to deny any knowledge of that. So I also contacted the Senegalese media, an editor friend of mine, and scanned and sent his travel documents and all of that. And he said, okay, let's not start fighting. Why don't you let me negotiate with the government to allow for his body to be brought back to Senegal, which he did. And so the Senegalese embassy in Mali actually paid for the repatriation of the corpse and for the young man to accompany Kukoy to Senegal. So I assumed that he would be buried in Senegal. And when he got to Senegal, I really had my hands off the matter, but I had given also the documentation and his laptop to this young man. Apparently his brother and other family members were in Senegal to give it to the family. So when they got to Dakar, the young man called me to say that the family said they wanted to bring the body back to the Gambia, which they tried to do, and apparently Jammeh refused, so he was eventually buried in Senegal. But this has happened in other cases too, like Buba Balde, the former minister and former director of Observer. I did not know him before until I was in exile, and he also stayed in my place a couple of times, traveling, but sometimes on Gambia matters, sometimes he was also, I guess, the Secretary General to the West African Fulani Association or something like that. So sometimes it would be on these matters, and we had a lot of conversations. And when he died as well, his family tried to bury him in the Gambia, but they were refused entry at the border.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I have come to the end of my questions. I will now hand over to Mr. Chairman for the commissioners to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Council, and thank you, Mrs. Sosseh, for a very detailed testimony. And some elements of that were quite chilling. But you're a survivor and a very brave lady as well. Thank you so much, Emma, for your testimony. Just have one quick clarification I want to seek from you, and tell me if what I scribbled, I got it wrong. It's a quote, I think, that I'm ascribing to you. You said in a general remark, quote, this is what I scribbled, Gambians want somebody to fight for them, even though they were the ones being attacked or threatened. If it is a wrong thing that I'm quoting you on that, I just want you to contextualize that. If what you're saying is something that can be applied to the entire 22-year period of the Jammeh regime, or if it was just an isolated context that you talked about, we wanting somebody to fight our fight instead of doing it. I assume there would be a unique exception to that group, and that is the journalists, because what we've been hearing these past 2 days, they are a brave bunch of people who did not give up. That was one word that I get away from yesterday's testimony, and even today, is that almost every single one of them is described as being stubborn. So I guess some of those stubborn guys were very brave, and they fought indeed. Now you can either answer the question for me now, or if you want to put it in the general context of your concluding remarks, I leave it to you to see what you would want to do. Then, if you want to answer the question now, fine. If not, I would ask the commissioners to.
I'll answer one aspect of it, and the other part leave for my closing remarks. As to the quote, those were my exact words. And to put this in context, as you say, the media aside, I've had the opportunity to interact with Gambians from different walks of life, security forces, the legal field, family members of victims. And at each point, they were more than willing to let you take the lead and stay behind the scenes because they felt this was the comfortable position to be in. And I think, as I said, much of the part of the beginning of the Jammeh regime, I was still a much younger person. But if I have to have a review of why all this happened, it would actually also be the attitude of Gambians. The regime was brutal. It was authoritarian. Jammeh certainly was a lunatic. But the fact that I've met Gambians who have had their husbands arrested, for example, and who were scared to go and visit them. And I have asked women, I said, what message do you think you're sending to your kids? Even if you're arrested, it's a good thing because you stand in solidarity with your husband. And this would tell your daughter that she must stand in solidarity with her brother, or later her husband. So I think part of it was complacence and the willingness to stay comfortable, which is really not true, right? I had this attitude, and I still have this attitude, that whether you speak or not, Jammeh would attack you. Whether you support him or not, he would attack you. And whether you oppose him or not, he would attack you. And I would rather belong to Group 3 at any point in time and remain in that position at any point in time in my life, I guess.
Thank you very much indeed, my commissioners. If you have any questions, please indicate. Commissioner Jones, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Mrs. Sosseh, I wanted clarity regarding the activities of CCG, that is the printing of T-shirts, that led to Dr. Jana and others being convicted and sentenced. Were you also charged with treason? Was that what you told the Commission?
I believe so, yes.
Sorry?
Yes.
Were you also convicted and sentenced?
No, from some legal explanation, apparently I had to face trial or something like that. I don't know why I was not convicted.
But you were not convicted?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Carr.
Thank you, Chairman. The first question I have is, you mentioned that you had a meeting with the National Security Council following Ndey's killing. Did that change anything in regard to the issues that you spoke to them about?
Certainly not. And I believe there were some issues that did not come up in my testimony, but that was not the first time, that was not the last time that I had a meeting or participated in a meeting with the National Security Council. I believe that on 2 other occasions, one as GPU Secretary General, and secondly, as GPU President, we had reason to request for a meeting with the National Security Council. And the last one was actually, for me, a defining moment because of the tone of other actors. As I said, in the first meeting, I made friends after that meeting. This is where I met Dr. Jana. This is where I met a current senior Army official, all of whom thought that what the GPU did was not only brave, but the right thing to do. But in eventual meetings, the last one would not have happened. I had sent a letter weeks before following a GPU monthly meeting. We used to have monthly meetings. That members requested that we follow up on the death of Ndey and the disappearance of Chief Mane, since we were not having much detail. So we wrote and indicated in the contents of the letter the rationale behind the meeting, and they never got back to us. And I contacted the office of the Vice President a few days to the next GPU meeting to tell them that we had actually written to them and that I was having a GPU meeting the next Saturday, and that I would tell the members that they did not respond to the letter because I did not have a response for my members. So they asked me to resend the letter. But they actually first said, but we did not receive the letter. I said, actually, I sent 2 copies and made sure that I had my copy signed, that it was received. But I could actually scan and send that to you, which I did. So they called us back and said we should go, because I think they met on Tuesdays or Wednesdays, I can't remember anymore, but that we should go that day to that meeting, which we did. And at that meeting, without exception, they were all very hostile, including the Vice President, as to what we wanted, why we wanted particular protections, and they wanted to walk out of the meeting, like not walk out, but that the meeting had ended. And they got up, and some of my colleagues, I'm not sure everyone, some of my colleagues too got up, but I did not get up. And so the protocol said the meeting is over. I said, no, it's not over. And he said, well, the Vice President has, I said, no, you did not listen to us. I asked specific questions on 2 issues at least, the rest we can leave, but I cannot go without an answer on Ndey Haidara and on Chief Ibrahim Mane. And she sat down, and they all sat down again. I think they were probably surprised that somebody else was dictating as to whether the meeting had ended or not. And she said, what exactly do you want? I said, well, if we ask to meet the National Security Council, it's because I don't expect you to have all the answers. The security chiefs are here. The Ministry of Justice is here. Other ministries are here who may have key information to give us. So why don't you allow them to speak? And so she turned around and said, do you have something to say? You can talk. You can talk. And then somebody else spoke. And I remember a security chief telling us that even his house was broken into, and they stole his video and his TV. And I said, but they didn't shoot anyone, right? And so why don't you tell us the concrete steps that were taken? They never did, so it was a whole rigmarole. But I guess from this meeting, I had another phone call. Well, I told my mom this day that I was going to be the subject of serious state scrutiny because of what I did. And then a protocol officer later told me, you are the first person in the history of the Gambia to restart a meeting of the National Security Council. And this was the case. I was followed closely after this meeting. Apparently, the president was aware. I don't know whether the meetings were recorded or not, but he was apparently very, very upset that I had the, I guess for him it was audacity, to ask again and make his security chiefs and vice president sit down again after they had declared the meeting closed. So they called me. On this day I was traveling. I was at the Banjul International Airport and I was told that the president wanted to meet me. So I asked this person, is he meeting me alone? And he said yes. I said, well, I'm at the airport and I'm boarding a plane, so it has to be another day. And he said, I said the president wants to meet you. I said, I just told you I'm traveling. We can reschedule it for another day, but it can't be today. So they never invited me again. I don't know why.
Thank you, Commissioner Imam Jallo.
Sorry, I'm not.
Oh, sorry.
I have further questions. All right, thank you. The second is you were president of the GPU when you were in exile. I'd like to know how that affected your work with Gambian journalists on some of the issues that were of importance to the executive.
Well, I guess when I was offered this appointment, I discussed it again with the GPU. I was actually proposed for this position by the former GPU president, Madi Sosseh, who was at the time a board member of WAJA. Actually, what happened was that when I became GPU president, I was normally supposed to be in the WAJA board, but we had proposed as GPU that any GPU executive member that was serving in a board would actually sit and wait out for the term of that board before the new executive would take on us. Obviously, they would have to give a report and all of that. And in my view as president, a former GPU president and an acting GPU president or a current GPU president doesn't really make much difference if we served on boards. So this was applicable inside and outside the country. So Madi had proposed my name and asked that I send my CV, and this is how I was selected for this position. So we had this conversation within the executive, and I had discussed it with senior members, as I said, Samsa, Uncle Swaibu, all of whom thought that possibly it was a good idea. It would give Gambian media also a platform to discuss our issues at a regional level. And obviously at that time there was internet, we could do Skype, we could do all of that. So it was not a problem. And WAJA had agreed that every quarter I could come back to the union, because WAJA is actually an association of journalist unions. So they know how it is important to have an effective union on the ground. Unfortunately, I never did the fourth quarter. I went the end of April 2009 and found myself an exilee a few weeks later. So I never had to use that option of coming back every quarter.
Final question. And this is also related to the extradition that you spoke about. From what I implied from your testimony, it prevented you from going to other countries, and that also affected your work. I'd like to know if that is the case and how. Thank you.
Technically, yes, because I could not come to the Gambia, even though I was overseeing activities linked to WAJA on the Gambia. In West Africa, no. As I said, I had had several conversations with different ECOWAS leaders on the situation in the Gambia, and I knew from those conversations that they did not have a very high opinion of the human rights situation in the Gambia, but also that the Gambia government did not really have any formal extradition agreements with other countries, so it would have meant a very long process. Whilst I was doing this, I was also on the boards of other international organizations, so it did affect, as I said, I was the treasurer of the Federation of African Journalists for almost 6 years, and I'm a board member of the All African Human Rights Defenders Network as the focal point for African journalists. So some of their activities, depending on where they were going, I could not partake in, so in that regard, but all of my colleagues across the board were aware of what was happening in the Gambia and would sometimes also, like we had meetings in Sudan, obviously I did not go. In Addis, I was wary, but I participated in meetings in Addis, but I made sure that I minimized my presence or just made my statements and then left. So to some extent, yes, but across the board I had colleagues who were concerned and who understood. And generally, part of the work we did was also on the protection of journalists and human rights defenders. So they knew some of the mechanisms that dictatorial governments use to silence people, and would not have asked me to step down because I could not effectively function due to activities influenced by the state.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Sorry, thank you very much, Madam. Imam, you have the floor, please.
Mrs. Sosseh,
Yes.
I first of all congratulate you for your bravery and for being the voice of the voiceless and being also the voice of the voices that have remained silent for a long time in this country because of fear. I have a question on the question of this opportunity you have taken and other journalists in this country being the voices of the people. Do we have any fund from your organization to ensure that families of victimized journalists are provided for? If it is not available, don't you think it is now high time for us to get together, both the voiceless and those who have voices, to ensure that we will, now and forever, provide for people who fall into this category, particularly our journalists, because they are really doing fantastic service to this nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Imam. Chairman, did you want to speak in French? Maybe I'll respond to you in French. Commissioner Jallo, luckily, in some instances, support is extended to family of exiled or journalists in distress. This is what we call that element of our project. I'm not sure a Gambian journalist has benefited from that, but we have hosted journalists from other countries. A journalist from Niger lived with us in Bamako in the safe house with his wife and his kids for more than a year until it was safe for him to get back. But there are institutions regionally and globally. The All Africa Human Rights Defenders Network that I referred to also has safe houses across African cities. They have one in Kampala and one in Abidjan. And as I said, I was the focal point for journalists, and sometimes I would send them names because they would have to vet of journalists who were in distress. And at the Waja level, you'd be surprised that this was not only happening to journalists in the Gambia, but journalists in states that are supposedly friendly to the media sometimes are also faced with such threats. I believe that we are currently in transition, and all of these things that are missing in the Gambia, this is the best time to work on this. The transition period is ending very fast, but we have put in place institutions that we can use, like the National Human Rights Commission. The TRRC in its recommendations should be able to, I believe, make recommendations to the government. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights is based in Banjul, And I'm almost certain that they would be willing, because they have taken up and raised, at this point in time, I did not deal with that in my testimony, but on a number of occasions, the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, who was a very good friend of the Gambia, Pansi Takula, tried on several occasions to meet with the Gambian authorities to raise issues of journalists, and they refused to meet her. So she found it very difficult to do much work, but she raised, and even in meetings that were held in Banjul, she raised concern at every point in time on the state of the media and the spate of attacks on journalists and human rights defenders in the Gambia. So I guess there are several national, regional, and international mechanisms that could be used. When we had our trial issues, particularly the GPU6, we received funding to support families of the journalists, because some institutions did believe that they were going to be in prison for 2 years. I never did, but institutions did, and they were kind enough to provide support. But beyond that support, I think the psychosocial support is also very important, because when people have a problem with the state, technically it's the state that has a problem with us, but others interpret it to be otherwise. You are seen as a pariah of sorts, or that you have the plague. And as I said, I'm one of the lucky few. But not every family, or not every journalist or victim of the former regime had that support. And I think this is necessary to include in the debate during this transition.
Thank you. I understand, Commissioner Jones, you have an additional question, and then that will be followed by Commissioner Kinte.
Sorry, Mr. Sosseh, I just have an additional question based on your response. Given the magnitude of threats you seemingly posed to the government, I'm just curious to know what happened to the charges. Were they dropped, or do you have pending charges in the court?
I'm assuming I do. When I came back to the Gambia for the first time in October 2017, I traveled with my family, husband and kids, and they all went through. And then the immigration officer held my passport for a while, and I said, "Am I on the wanted persons list?" And he said, "No, that doesn't exist anymore." But it was a joke, and then they all, like several immigration officers came, "Oh, you are later for Sosseh." I said, "So indeed I was here, right?" But we had this friendly chat, so I guess I was on the wanted persons list. I don't know about the dropping of the charges. I really never followed up on that.
Was it just you? Sorry, just the last one. Was it just you, or were there any other individual, one of the accused, who these charges were dropped, or they were not convicted? Do you know?
Yes, there were two others, Matthew Kejalo and Famara Demba, who were both based in the UK. I'm not sure that Matthew has been since the change of government, but I assume that Famara has.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ndey Tapha. You've been very resilient and very dynamic. I hope we have a good number of young ladies like yourself in the Gambia, supporting Gambia. You said the jungler who absconded and sought your support told you he witnessed more than 100 killings, or the killing of more than 100 people. And I believe I understand that you also learned from him that it was then that you confirmed that the Jammeh government were responsible of the killing of Ndey. Did you have opportunity to learn from him the specific individuals who executed or carried out the killing? That's my first question.
Just a point of correction. He did say that he witnessed at least, not more, at least 100. So it's possibly more than, but he did say at least 100. On those who took part, I believe he wanted to protect some of his colleagues, so he did not name names, but he did name that the commander of their group at the time shot at. I don't know who the commander was. The initial shot came from him, and that the commander was speaking to Jammeh and to the former interior minister on the phone whilst they were tailing data. Yeah.
The second question is, Chief Mane is still missing. Mm-hmm. Of course, by now, it will be established that he is not alive because he would have said, I'm here, somewhere in the world, but that's not happening. You told us it was Dampa who last saw him in one of the police stations, I believe in Patoto also. Now, were you opportune to know from him whether he was killed by the junglers or not, and whoever did, where and how he was killed?
He did confirm that Chief Mane was no longer alive, but that the intention apparently was not to kill him, that he was over-tortured, if you want to put it that way, and buried somewhere near a police station or behind a police station. This interview took place sometime in 2012, so some of the elements, like including locations, have sort of escaped me, but as I said, I have minutes of that meeting, handwritten notes, which I could make available to the Commission if need be.
Please, and are you confirming the very station that Dampa last saw him was where he was tortured to death and buried around there, or another police station?
I believe it was a different police station. I believe that he was moved when he saw Yaya Dampa.
So you don't still know which police station?
Yeah, I saw him in Fatoto, but I don't know near which police station he was buried now.
Thank you very much. You may now proceed with your concluding remarks, Mrs. Sosseh.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did not prepare anything, but I thought I would use this opportunity, first of all, because I have not met or had not met some of my colleagues who had to undergo undue and unnecessary trauma because of actions that I decided to embark on. And I think this would be a perfect opportunity to say sorry to them. I, at that point in time, and at various points in time, have embarked on activities geared at possibly alleviating their suffering or that of their families, but that does not in any way mean that they did not suffer. People suffered, and some people suffered because of actions that I decided to take, but I do not regret those actions. If we had to go back, I would take each and every decision that I took at that point in time. Having said that, I congratulate the TRRC. I watch you from Bamako. It's after watching some of the episodes, I take a break, and I think that all of you are much more courageous than me to have to listen to the chilling details that come out in some of the testimonies. I do look forward to other sessions, but particularly to your report and recommendations that would come out of this report that would ensure that the Never Again campaign would mean never again. As some of my colleagues attested to, some of the criteria, if you want to put it that way, that allowed this to happen still exists. And I think the TRRC is one mechanism that we can use to ensure that some of the changes that we need, institutional changes, I know that you have different units, but even behavior change communications is key to the success of the TRRC, and I see some of the activities that you go about doing, particularly on sensitization, and this touches on issues that I have campaigned on and worked on over the past 10 years, particularly freedom of information and freedom of expression. Both of these are fundamental human rights, and we cannot get them wrong. And I believe this is the right moment to work on this. I must commend the Freedom of Information Coalition for having submitted a draft act or piece of legislation to the Ministry of Justice. As I said, access to information is not only a fundamental human right, it is key to making decisions. And so long as we don't have the right information at the right time and the relevant quality of information, we would continue making uninformed decisions. We would believe we're making decisions, but they would not be informed. So this is one thing that I hope would come out of the TRRC recommendations, but possibly before that, maybe the Gambia government would act on that. Another issue is freedom of expression. Free expression, I believe, is seen here as a journalist matter. It's not a media matter. It's everybody's business. And obviously the media being at the center of information processing are seen to be the advocates for free expression. But free expression is also key to development. It's key to the success of every government. Because I use Senegal always as an example of a bedrock of democracy. When you listen to the news in Senegal, you think that it's going to go up in flames tomorrow. It's not. It's because people have a platform to express their fears, their concerns, to lambast if there is a need, because sometimes that's how the information should come out. And because I've traveled a lot across Africa, all the African countries that are developing at a much faster pace, it's also linked to freedom of expression. It enables the government understand the concerns of the people. It enables decision makers understand what is needed when and where. And so long as we don't get this ingredient right in our process to transition and to heal and to reconcile, we're going to get the whole arithmetic wrong. It also leads to tolerance. There's one major concern that I have, which I discuss with political leaders particularly, and I've had the privilege, because I guess I was seen to be a Jama resistor, to have befriended all the leaders of all the parties. And this is the message that I have said to each and every one of them that I have a relationship with. It's divergent view. That I disagree with you does not mean we cannot be friends. I have a right to have a divergent view, and you have a responsibility to tolerate my divergent view. And this, I believe, still does not exist. People have to succumb or agree with or to a particular agenda to be seen to be patriotic. And this word has been misconstrued over the years to mean love for the government. It's not. It's love for one's country. That you are running the government or running the country does not mean in any way that you love the Gambia more than me. I love it equally. That's why when I see something going wrong, I have an obligation to tell you, hey, look out. We may sink, because if it sinks, we all do. So I think patriotism, tolerance are words that are key to your Never Again campaign. Another message for my colleagues in the media and possibly civil society is solidarity and unity, networking possibly. I believe that without history, I would not have been able to register so-called successes. In my view, it was not successful. That colleagues went to prison, that people were exiled, mean for me that I was not as successful as I wanted to be. But the fact that every time we as the Gambia Press Union or civil society had issues with Jammeh, he had to take a step back. It was because of the magnitude of the solidarity inside and outside the country, of the unity amongst us and within our networks globally. I see that because of the transition and because of some of the so-called freedoms that we have, people tend to forget about the importance of that. But we are still living in a country where the same old media laws, the same old criminal code exists. I happen to know that work is being done because I was co-chair of the Media Law Review Committee under the Ministry of Information, but the committee has submitted a report. Other members of the committee are here more than 1 year ago, and nothing has been done. So these are all things that we should be seeing journalists talk about, the media interested in, because once the transition period disappears, many of the things are going to stay. And it means never again may not really be never again, I'm afraid. So there are so many other issues that I would want to raise, but since these are my closing remarks, Mr. Chair, and we're supposed to go on break, I would once again thank the Commission for having invited me or coerced me into appearing, because I was not intending to. I just wanted to make a written statement. But I am glad that we did, and that we were able to talk on particular issues that I felt were not coming out, particularly the issue of citizenship came up, but refusal of one's national documents is also as scary as being told that you're non-Gambian. The issue of extradition, the issue of refusal to bury one's loved ones in their country of origin. I hope that other testimonies will touch on several issues that I did not talk about. I think this is also the right platform to thank the GPU, to thank the Gambian media fraternity, to thank particularly Article 19, Amnesty, well, the list goes on, all the international media organizations, and friends of the media globally who made sure that we were able to stay strong and united. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and we're the ones who should be appreciative and grateful that you accepted to come and testify on very short notice. Again, a million thanks to you. Council, before we take a 1 hour break, are you entering any documents now, or you want to do that at the beginning of the next session?
I would have liked to do it now, but because of the time, I think it's best to do it after the lunch break. It's only 4 documents.
You may proceed now. Let's do it. 1-2 minutes only.
So
all I will do is just, I must say, accepted. So I've done it 4 times, that's enough then.
I'll still read it into the record.
Please go ahead.
The statement issued by GPU in response to the President's statements on Data Haidara would be Exhibit 0057. The list of the death row inmates would be 0058. List of the CSAG's press release regarding the executions at Mile 2, the death row inmates, would be 0059. And the name that Mrs. Sosseh provided of the jungler that she interviewed would be 0060. I request for all these documents to be admitted into the record.
Thank you, Council. Request granted, and if we come back at 3:30. It's now 2:20. We have an hour and 10 minutes break. So see you all at 3:30. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.